We're still in Book 1 of the Republic, and last time we left off where Thrasymachus was about to give us his definition of justice, and we're about to see what Socrates had to say about it. So let's go ahead and start off with Book 1 of the Republic, 338b9. Listen then, he said, I proclaim that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. And now, why do you not thank me? But of course you won't. Sounds pretty pessimistic, right? Justice is just whatever the strongest people say that it is. Is he serious? Can he really have reasons to believe this? Well, let's find out. Let me first understand you, I replied. Justice, as you say, is the interest of the stronger. What, Thrasymachus, is the meaning of this? You cannot mean to say that because Polydamas, I don't really know how you say that name, the pancratiast, even worse on that, is stronger than we are, and finds the eating of beef conducive to his bodily strength, that to eat beef is therefore equally for our good who are weaker than he is, and right and just for us? So I had to look this one up. Pancration is some kind of Greek sport fighting. So in other words, Polydamas was a very strong guy. And Thrasymachus said that justice had to do with the interest of the stronger. So here's the argument. Thrasymachus gives us the following definition of justice. That justice is doing what is in the interest of the stronger. But Polydamas is stronger. Therefore, justice is doing what is in the interest of Polydamas? And then what is in the interest of Polydamas is eating beef, right? By in the interest of, we mean like benefits him. Something like, to his best interest. So if it's in the best interest of Polydamas to eat beef, does that mean that justice is eating beef? This is a reductio ad absurdum argument given by Socrates. And it's for a certain reason, but the whole point here is like, let's assume that you're right, Thrasymachus, that justice is doing what is in the interest of the stronger, then it leads to this absurd conclusion, so therefore it can't be. That's usually the way this argument works, but let's see what happens. That's abominable of you, Socrates. You take the words in the sense which is most damaging to the argument. And this is a legitimate response by Thrasymachus, which is appealing to the principle of charity. And the principle of charity says that when we're communicating with each other, it is always possible to take what somebody else says in a very absurd way. So our kids are masters of this. You tell your kid, hey, I'll be there in a second, and what does he say? 1. And you're like, of course, I was being hyperbolic, right? I was not saying literally 1 second. So when we're trying to understand someone, we typically will interpret what they had to say in the way that makes the most sense, in the way that's not absurd. Unless, of course, they go on to clarify that they actually did mean what we typically would think was absurd. So, as in if mom says, I will be there in 1 second, and I mean a literal 1 second, not a figurative one. In other words, T minus 1 second, 1, that kind of second. You clarify because people would typically take you to mean the less absurd one. So Thrasymachus is upset because it sounds like Socrates is purposely trying not to understand him. Just like that kid that counts to 1 second. Not at all, my good sir, I said. I'm trying to understand them, and I wish that you would be a little clearer. So it's true in philosophy, just as in everyday dialogue, that we use the principle of charity to understand someone. And yet in philosophy, we also want to be clear and precise to avoid errors. So Socrates here might not necessarily be violating this principle. What he might be doing is just asking for more clarity. He might be saying, well, look, given your definition, this vague definition of justice would be eating beef, which is clearly absurd. So, we need to add some kind of criteria here or something, change the definition just a little bit, make it a little bit more precise so that we exclude those kinds of things. So Socrates really here is just asking for more precision. Well, he said, have you never heard the forms of government differ? There are tyrannies, and there are democracies, and there are aristocracies. Yes, I know. And the government is the ruling power in each state? Certainly. And the different forms of government make laws democratical, aristocratical, tyrannical, with a view to their several interests. And these laws, which are made by them for their own interests, are the justice which they deliver to their subjects. And him who transgresses them, they punish as a breaker of the law and unjust. And that is what I mean when I say that in all states there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government. And as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of justice which is the interest of the stronger. So it does seem that Thrasymachus is being incredibly pessimistic about his view of justice. He is saying that it's just might makes right and that's it. The question then is, does he really believe this to be justice, or is he just saying that there is no such thing as justice? Justice is just, a word that the government throws around. And if he really does believe this, how can he really support what seems like such an absurd thing? Well, let's see. In this passage, he argues as follows. First, that rulers make laws that they believe to be in their interest. Now, this is a postulate that he's throwing out there. He's assuming this to be true. He doesn't ever really argue for it. There are a couple of arguments that I can think of that might support this postulate. The first one being psychological hedonism, which is that people always act for their own self-interest. Even if you think that you're not acting in your self-interest, but in somebody else's, really there's some reason why that actually is something that benefits you. Maybe it makes you feel happy to benefit somebody else, even though you don't get like some money out of it or something like that. So ultimately you're acting for your own self-interest, even when you act to help other people. According to psychological hedonism, it makes sense to say that lawmakers, when they're making their laws, would act in self-interest as well. So psychological hedonism might be one support for this postulate. And if you want to know more about psychological hedonism, I actually did a video on it a while back, so you can go and check that out. If I forget to link it, remind me in the comments, please, and then I'll put a link up top. Another possible argument you could use here is a survival of the fittest kind of an argument. The government that's most interested in its own self-preservation is the one most likely to survive. And you might object right off the bat, but wait a second, when we talk about humans, survival of the fittest doesn't quite work that way, right? We needed to be able to cooperate in order to survive, in order to fend off predators, in order to find food. Therefore, for humans, the person who is just out for their own self-interest is least likely to survive. And yet governments seem a lot different. Governments don't cooperate with each other for those kinds of reasons. In fact, they seldom cooperate with each other, and if they do, it's typically just to fend off other governments. Now, you may say that governments must cooperate with the people in order to stay in charge, and yet it seems like that's just factually incorrect. First, we can really look at just the history of empires, people that have come in and conquered others and exploited them and stayed in power for years and years and years, even though the people that they were ruling over didn't really cooperate with the government. They didn't want the government there. You could think about the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Spanish Empire, even the Inca and the Aztec Empire themselves. The Incas weren't just sitting around being nice to everybody and the Spaniards came over and bullied them. The Incas were exploiting the people of their land, enslaving them, taking their wives and children, and yet they had centuries of rule. So I think history doesn't really bear that out, that the government needs to cooperate with the people in order to stay in charge. And I think there are a lot of governments today that aren't cooperating with their people, and yet since they are so hell-bent on staying in charge, staying in power, they're able to do so. Now, you are totally free to disagree with me on this, but I would say the most obvious, in my eyes, case of this is Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Here's a guy that is a catastrophic failure in what should be the richest country in South America with its oil stores, with its support from China and Russia. This country should be leading the way, and yet it is impoverished. Hundreds of thousands of people have left. People today are experiencing food shortages, medical shortages, power outages, all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, you could say that I'm an American, dismiss my opinion. I get it. I'm not a Venezolano. And I totally understand that the United States is not innocent in foreign affairs and that capitalism, the way we practice it, is not the way, the truth, and the light. And yet, enough Venezuelans have expressed their discontent with the former election, enough outside agencies that are, nobody's totally unbiased, but that are relatively unbiased, have objected to the last elections to show that Maduro was a dictator. And yet, even though the government is not cooperating with so many people, so much so that they're leaving in droves, Maduro stays in power because he has the ear of the military. So long as the military doesn't back down, Maduro can't be kicked out without somebody actually coming in and taking him out. So maybe it is a possibility that governments that are most interested in their own survival are also the ones that are fittest to survive, therefore they do survive. I'm not saying I believe that. In fact, I would say I disbelieve that. I think that there it is possible for governments not to make laws in their own interest. But if you were following along with Thrasymachus, if you believe that this is a viable argument that you could give to support your case, now you might object, but what about democracy? Right? Democracy is rule of the people. Therefore, the laws aren't benefiting the rulers. But then again, if it is ruled by the people, think about that. The people are going to make laws that benefit themselves, the people, right? So the rulers are benefiting themselves. And yet, democracy, is it really ruled by all the people? No, it's ruled by the majority, right? In a pure democracy. And remember, Plato dislikes democracy. He thinks it's mob rule, and for good reason. Imagine, this is something Alexis de Tocqueville called tyranny of the majority. So long as a majority vote in a particular thing, they can vote in whatever they want, even if it is to the detriment of a minority, even if it seems unfair to the minority, right? So if justice is just whatever we voted in, then the majority can make just things that are harmful to the minority. So Thrasymachus includes democracy among his list of different governments that make rules that are in their own interests. His next premise is that rulers have all the power. Why is that? Because they're the ones that are making the laws. So putting 6 and 7 together, we get that the people with all the power make laws that are in their interest. Thrasymachus' next premise is this, that justice is following the laws. Now, this might mean that justice is solely following the laws, or it might mean that one of the things that is always just is following the laws. Whatever it is, this is not a premise that Socrates really objects to. Socrates believes this, he agrees in this. So he's not going to, if he's going to object to this argument, this is one that is going to stay put. Now, given 8 and 9, Thrasymachus gets his original definition of justice. Justice is doing what is in the interest of the powerful. So this thing that seems so pessimistic, Thrasymachus actually does have some decent reasons for. If you grant him that people are making laws in their own interest, and a lot of times it sure seems like that. If they're making laws in their own interest, and if we're going to say that it is just to follow the laws, then justice is, doing what's in those people's interest. Now, so Plato doesn't actually believe this. In fact, he's putting Thrasymachus here so that he can eventually, hopefully, respond to this kind of a view. But at least you could see how he's trying to make it look as plausible as possible, and he gives a pretty decent argument for it. How does this argument fare? Let's find out. Now I understand you, I said. And whether you're right or not, I'll try to discover. But let me remark that in defining justice, you have yourself used the word interest, which you forbade me to use. It is true, however, that in your definition the words of the stronger are added. A small addition you must allow, he said. Well, great or small, never mind about that. We must first inquire whether what you're saying is the truth. Now, we're both agree that justice is interest of some sort, but you go on to say, of the stronger. About this addition I'm not so sure, and must therefore consider further. Proceed? I will. And first tell me, do you admit that it is just for subjects to obey their rulers? I do. And that was really proposition number 9 that we saw. But are the rulers of states absolutely infallible? Or are they sometimes liable to err? To be sure, he replied. They are liable to err. In other words, they make mistakes. Then in making their laws, they may sometimes make them rightly and sometimes not. True. When they make them rightly, they make them agreeably to their interest. When they're mistaken, contrary to their interest. You admit that? Yes. And the laws which they make must be obeyed by their subjects, and that is what you call justice, doubtless. Then justice, according to your argument, is not only obedience to the interest of the stronger, but the reverse. What is that you're saying? He asked. I'm only repeating what you're saying, I believe. But let us consider. Have we not admitted that the rulers may be mistaken about their own interest in what they command? And also that to obey them is justice? Has that not been admitted? Yes. Then you must also have acknowledged justice not to be for the interest of the stronger when the rulers unintentionally command things to be done which are to their own injury. For if, as you say, justice is the obedience which the subject renders to their commands, in that case, O wisest of men, is there any escape from the conclusion that the weaker are commanded to do not what is for the interest, but what is for the injury of the stronger? So let's look at our argument again. Rulers make laws they believe to be in their interests. Rulers have all the power, so the people with all the power make laws that are in their interests. Justice is following the laws, so justice is doing what is in the interest of the powerful. But notice that 6 doesn't say that they make laws that are in their own interests. 6 says they make laws they believe to be in their own interest, but they can fail to reach that goal. They can make mistakes about what is in their interest and what is to their injury. So, our conclusion actually doesn't follow from 6. Actually, 8 doesn't follow from 6 either. Instead, what we have is something like this. Now, hopefully this is intuitive here, but I put in stars by the numbers here so that you can see that I've replaced a proposition with a new one, and ultimately we get a different kind of argument. 6 star, rulers sometimes make laws that are against their interests. 7, rulers have all the power. 8 star, so the people with all the power sometimes make laws that are against their interests. 9, justice is following the laws. So 1 star, justice is sometimes doing what is against the interest of the powerful. Now, this conclusion seems to be contradictory to the conclusion that Thrasymachus was trying to establish. So let's see what happens. Polemarchus chimes in. Nothing can be clearer, Socrates, said Polemarchus. Why is Polemarchus all of a sudden talking? Well, this argument that Socrates sets forth sounds remarkably similar to the one that we just saw given against Polemarchus. Remember, Polemarchus said that justice is doing what's good to your friends and what's evil to your enemies. Socrates said, well, wait a second, you can be mistaken about who's your friend and enemies. So it seems like justice would be on that definition, doing what's good to some enemies sometimes, when you're mistaken, and doing what's evil to your friends sometimes when you're mistaken about who your friend is. Polemarchus, however, had a good solution for that. He said, let's change that word friend to not only do you think they're your friend, but they also actually are your friend, and the same with the enemy, right? They're not only do you think they're your enemy, but they actually are your enemy. And then all of a sudden, that objection goes away. Now, Socrates actually didn't have a response to that. That was a successful response that Polemarchus made. All Socrates did was went on to a different argument. Would the same response work here? It would seem like you'd have to say something like, justice is doing what these guys believe to be in their self-interest and what actually is in their self-interest. But let's see if Thrasymachus uses that argument. Yes, said Cleitophon, interposing. If you are allowed to be his witness, the Cleitophon remembers on Thrasymachus' side, Polemarchus is on Socrates' side. But there's no need of any witness, said Polemarchus. For Thrasymachus himself acknowledges that rulers may sometimes command what is not for their own interest, and that for subjects to obey them is justice. Yes, Polemarchus, Thrasymachus said that for subjects to do what was commanded by their rulers is just. Yes, Cleitophon, but he also said that justice is the interest of the stronger. And while admitting both these propositions, he further acknowledged that the stronger may command the weaker, who are his subjects, to do what is not for his own interest. Whence it follows that justice is the injury quite as much as the interest of the stronger. But, said Cleitophon, he meant by the interest of the stronger what the stronger thought to be his interest. This was what the weaker had to do. And this was affirmed by him to be justice. So, here's the possible solution. Thrasymachus claims that justice is doing what is in the interest of the stronger, but he admits that the stronger sometimes make laws that are against their own interests, and it follows then that justice is sometimes doing what is against the interest of the powerful. But then those two propositions, 1 and 1 star, are contradictory propositions. Cleitophon's solution is to rework the argument again. 6, rulers make laws they believe to be in their interests. 7, rulers have all the power. 8, star, so the people with all the power make laws that they believe are in their interests. 9, justice is following the laws. 1 star, so justice is doing what the powerful believe is in their interest. And this is not contradictory to 1 star. So Thrasymachus' original argument for 1 was invalid because 1 didn't follow from 6. And also, he admitted something that would lead to a contradiction with 1, which was 1 star. Cleitophon's solution has the advantages that it makes that same argument all of a sudden valid, even though it does change the conclusion, but that's not so bad because the conclusion now is not contradictory with 1 star. Justice can be doing what the powerful believe is in their interest, and yet is not actually in their interest. Will Thrasymachus use this suggestion by Cleitophon? Let's find out. Those were not his words, rejoined Polemarchus. Never mind, I replied. If he now says that they are, let us accept his statement. Tell me, Thrasymachus, I said, do you mean by justice what the stronger thought to be his interest, whether really so or not? Certainly not, he said. Do you suppose that I call him who is mistaken the stronger at the time that he is mistaken? So, in other words, he's not going to take this solution of Cleitophon's. Yes, I said. my impression was that you did so when you admitted that the ruler was not infallible but might be sometimes mistaken. In other words, Socrates asked Thrasymachus if the ruler can make a mistake, the strong person can make a mistake. Thrasymachus admitted yes. So that would mean that the powerful person can make a mistake. And yet Thrasymachus just said that, no, they're not strong, they're not powerful at the moment they're making the mistake. You argue like an informer, Socrates. Do you mean, for example, that he who is mistaken about the sick is a physician in that he is mistaken? Or that he who errs in arithmetic or grammar is an arithmetician or a grammarian at the time when he's making the mistake? In respect of the mistake? True, we say that the physician or the arithmetician or grammarian has made a mistake, but this is only a way of speaking. For the fact is that neither the grammarian nor any other person of skill ever makes a mistake, insofar as he is what his name implies. They none of them err unless their skill fails them, and then they cease to be skilled artists. No artist or sage or ruler errs at the time when he is what his name implies, though he's commonly said to err. And I adopted the common mode of speaking. But to be perfectly accurate, since you're such a lover of accuracy, we should say that the ruler, insofar as he is the ruler, is unerring, and being unerring, always commands that which is for his own interest. And the subject is required to execute his commands, and therefore, as I said at first and now repeat, justice is the interest of the stronger. So here's the new argument. 6 rulers make laws that are in their interests. In other words, not that they make laws they believe that are in their interests, but laws that actually are in their own interests. And then the rest of his original argument just follows. 7 rulers have all the power, so the people with all the power make laws that are in their interests. Justice is following the laws, so justice is doing what is in the interest of the powerful. In other words, he changes that first premise 6 to 6 and now he has a valid argument. Now 1 is still contradictory with 1 but he's going to say that 1 is not true. He only admitted that it was true in a manner of speaking, but it's not strictly speaking true. But how can he do so? How can he say that a ruler never makes a mistake, a ruler never errs? He claims that a ruler is only truly a ruler when he is making laws that are in his own self-interest. So here's the argument he gives. Number 10, ruling is a techne. And remember we said that word techne means something like a skill or a craft or an art. And by the word art, by the way, I don't mean like a fine art. I mean something that you make or do as a human. But this is something that he assumes, not necessarily true, but it's something he assumes and that Socrates also assumes. 11, strictly speaking, a techne is only practiced when practiced correctly. How does this make sense? Well, think of a techne as something like a kind of a knowledge of how to do something, right? So let's say your techne is being a mathematician. You know how to math. And I ask you, what's 2 plus 2? And you say 5. Now, are you using your knowledge of your craft? Are you using your techne to tell me that 2 plus 2 equals 5? Now, it seems like your knowledge would go against this, right? So you're not using the knowledge of your craft to give me that answer. Or let's say you're a doctor, right? Your techne is medicine and you prescribe the wrong thing. Would we say that it's a result of your knowledge of practicing medicine that you prescribed this wrong thing? No, I mean, it would be the opposite. It would be against your knowledge of practicing medicine. So if techne is this kind of a knowledge of how to do something, and you make a mistake in doing that thing, it's not from that knowledge of how. And if we're going to give you that name of a mathematician or a doctor, strictly speaking, for that knowledge of how to do that thing, then when you make those mistakes, you are not, strictly speaking, a doctor or a mathematician. Now, I know what you might be thinking, that everybody makes mistakes, right? I don't stop calling you a doctor just because you made one mistake. Now, if Thrasymachus sees that, and that's actually the error that he made earlier, right? He said that a ruler can make a mistake, but he says this is only a manner of speaking, not strictly speaking, but just a manner of speaking. If we're being precise, then because ruling or practicing medicine or being a mathematician is a techne, is a knowledge of how to do those arts or crafts or skills, then strictly speaking, we can't call you those things when you make those mistakes. And this is actually a decent response, that the manner of speaking kind of a response. Language doesn't always perfectly reflect reality. So, for example, I might say, Billy dreams about skateboards, Bobby dreams about surfboards, rocks dream about nothing. And when I say that, it makes it sound like nothing is something that rocks are actually dreaming about, like it's a thing there, like surfboards or skateboards that you would actually dream about. But no, really what I'm doing here is saying that rocks don't dream about anything, right? There's not something that rocks dream about. So the language that I'm using here is sort of belying what my intention is. I shouldn't conclude that nothing is a real thing just because I use the language in a particular way. In the same way, we might still call a person that's practicing math a mathematician when they make a mistake, even though technically speaking, they're not using that knowledge when they make that mistake. It's not a result of their knowledge that they make the mistake. So strictly speaking, we shouldn't say that the mathematician made a mistake. We should say something instead like he failed to practice math when he made that mistake, but not call him a mathematician in making that mistake. Okay, so proposition 12, ruling or governing is the techne of making laws that benefit oneself. And this is sort of his surmisal here. 13, so a person is not a ruler, strictly speaking, when she makes a law that doesn't benefit herself. At that point, she doesn't know how to rule. So she's not practicing the techne of ruling. Indeed, Thrasymachus, and do I really appear to you to argue like an informer? Certainly, he replied. And you suppose that I ask these questions with any design of injuring you in the argument? Nay, he replied, suppose is not the word. I know it. But you will be found out, and by sheer force of argument you will never prevail. Well, I shall not make the attempt, my dear man. But to avoid any misunderstanding occurring between us in the future, let me ask, in what sense do you speak of a ruler or stronger whose interest, as you were saying, he being the superior, it is justice in other words, that the inferior should execute? Is he a ruler in the popular or in the strict sense of the term? In the strictest of all senses, he said, and now cheat and play the informer if you can. I ask no quarter at your hands, but you never will be able. Never. In other words, typically, commonly speaking, we use that word ruler just to mean one who rules. But Thrasymachus is saying that that's not, strictly speaking, correct. Socrates is saying, okay, going forward here, how are you going to be using this word ruler? In your technical sense of the term, or in the common sense of the term, just one who rules? Thrasymachus says, I'm using it in the technical sense. Let's get down some criteria for Thrasymachus's use of this word ruler. In fact, what I'll do here is I'll just write T ruler for Thrasymachus ruler, just so we know going forward when we say that word ruler, what Thrasymachus means is one who rules, just like we said before, but also one who always makes laws that benefit themselves and one who never makes mistakes about which laws benefit themselves. So given that definition of what a T ruler is, let me go ahead and rework the argument one more time just to keep straight. This is actually the same exact argument that Thrasymachus was given, but now we're saying, hey, this is what he meant by the word ruler. So 6, T rulers make laws that are in their interests. 7, T rulers have all the power. So the people with all the power make laws that are in their interest. Justice is following the laws, so justice is doing what is in the interest of the powerful. And do you imagine I said that I am such a madman as to try and cheat, Thrasymachus? Might as well shave a lion. Why, he said, you made the attempt a minute ago, and you failed. Enough, I said, of these civilities. It will be better that I should ask you a question. Is the physician, taken in that strict sense of which you were speaking, a healer of the sick or a maker of money? And remember that I am now speaking of the true physician. In other words, like we said, T ruler, right? This could be like T physician, speaking in that strictest of senses, not any kind of ancillary interest that they have. A healer of the sick, he replied. And the pilot, that is to say the true pilot, is he a captain of sailors or a mere sailor? A captain of sailors. The circumstance that he sails in the ship is not to be taken into account. Neither is he to be called a sailor. The name pilot, by which he is distinguished, has nothing to do with sailing, but is significant of his skill and of his authority over the sailors. Very true, he said. So here's the first part of Socrates' response, that each techne has a primary interest, even if it is accompanied by other interests. So, for example, medicine as a techne, the interest is healing the sick or healing the body or the health of the body or something like that, but it might have some ancillary interests such as making money. Or the pilot, she has as her primary interest piloting the ship, but then there are also secondary interests, ancillary interests that might just come with the territory, like happening to be also a sailor on the ship or also maybe happening to want all the chrome on your chest. I don't know, whatever. There might be other things that are of interest to the pilot of the ship, and yet the piloting part itself has one main interest, which is piloting the ship. Now, I said, every art has an interest? Certainly. For which that art has to consider and provide? Yes, that is the aim of the art. And the interest of any art is the perfection of it? This and nothing else? What do you mean? I mean what I may illustrate negatively by the example of the body. Suppose you were to ask me whether the body is self-sufficing or has wants. I should reply, well, certainly the body has wants, for the body may be ill and require to be cured, and has therefore interests to which the art of medicine ministers. And this is the origin and intention of medicine, as you will acknowledge. Am I not right? So the body is not self-sufficient, but needs medicine. Here's proposition 15. The aim of a techne is to perfect its primary interest. Medicine's primary interest is the health of the body. So the aim of that techne of medicine is to perfect the health of the body. Quite right, he replied. But is the art of medicine or any other art faulty or deficient in any quality in the same way that the eye may be deficient in sight or the ear fail of hearing, and therefore requires another art to provide for the interest of seeing and hearing? Has art in itself, I say, any similar liability to fault or defect? In other words, your eye might not be perfect in sight or your ear might not be perfect in hearing, and he's asking, is medicine like that? Has art in itself, I say, any similar liability to fault or defect? And does every art require another supplementary art to provide for its interests, and then another and another without end? Or have the arts to look only after their own interests? Or have they no need either of themselves or of another? Having no faults or defects, they have no need to correct them, either by their exercise of their own art or of any other. They have only to consider the interest of their subject matter. For every art remains pure and faultless while remaining true. That is to say, while perfect and unimpaired. Take the words in your precise sense and tell me whether I'm not right. So, the thing that a techne aims to perfect, its primary interest, is either itself, some other techne, or some third thing. Now, it can't be that a techne's primary interest is itself or some other techne. Why? Because Thrasymachus just said that a techne can never be imperfect. A techne is only itself when practiced correctly. So it must be the case that its primary interest, its aim, the thing that it wants to perfect, is not a techne, but whatever other thing that is. Again, for medicine, it would be the health of the body. Yes, clearly. Then medicine does not consider the interest of medicine, but the interest of the body. True, he said. Nor does the art of horsemanship consider the interests of the art of horsemanship, but the interest of the horse. Neither do any other arts care for themselves, for they have no needs. They care only for that which is the subject of their art. True, he said. But surely, Thrasymachus, the arts are the superiors and rulers of their own subjects? So, premise 19 here, the techne, or maybe the techne practitioner, is the ruler of the things in her techne's primary interest. To this he assented with a good deal of reluctance. Then, I said, no science or art considers or enjoins the interest of the stronger or superior, but only the interest of the subject and weaker. He made an attempt to contest this proposition also, but finally acquiesced. Then I continued, no physician, insofar as he's a physician, considers his own good in what he prescribes, but the good of his patient. For the true physician is also a ruler having the human body as a subject, and is not a mere moneymaker. That has been admitted? Yes. So in other words, like if a doctor were to prescribe you a drug just to sell the drug, then he's not acting like a doctor there. He can do that, he can be a moneymaker, but he's not acting as a doctor when he's doing so. Or I should say, he's not practicing the techne of medicine. And the pilot likewise, in the strict sense of the term, is a ruler of sailors and not a mere sailor? That has been admitted. And such a pilot and ruler will provide and prescribe for the interest of the sailor who is under him, and not for his own or the ruler's interest. He gave a reluctant yes. Then I said, Thrasymachus, there is no one in any rule who, insofar as he is a ruler, considers or enjoins what is for his own interest, but always what is for the interest of his subject, or suitable to his art. To that he looks, and that alone he considers in everything which he says and does. So, conclusion here, 20, a ruler only aims to perfect his subjects, not, in other words, to benefit himself. Now, hopefully you can see what just happened there. Thrasymachus is arguing that being a ruler is a techne, and since a techne is like a knowledge of how to do something, you can't make mistakes if you're using the actual knowledge. So you can't make mistakes in a techne. Socrates says, well, wait a second. If being a ruler is a techne, well, technes don't aim at perfecting themselves, at benefiting themselves. They always aim at perfecting the thing that is their primary interest, which is not themselves. So if a ruler is, practicing this techne, then he's not going to be trying to benefit himself, but to benefit that thing that is his primary interest. In other words, his people being ruled. Now, why is this important to us? Well, Thrasymachus just gave us this, very pessimistic view of justice, saying that what justice is just to benefit those people that are making the laws, the strong, right? The people that are in charge. That's all justice is just to benefit those people. And because they're always making laws that are benefiting themselves. Now, Socrates comes along and says they might be always making laws that benefit themselves, but if they're doing so, then they're not being rulers, right? They're being self-benefiters, in the same way that a doctor that was prescribing you a drug that just wanted to make money off it was not really going to help you, would just be a moneymaker in that instance and not be, strictly speaking, a doctor. In the same way, a ruler who was just trying to benefit herself by making a specific kind of a law would not be practicing the art or the techne of ruling, but would just be a moneymaker or whatever it would be, a self-benefiter. So in one sense, Socrates doesn't assuage our fears that there's never anybody that is making laws that don't benefit themselves. But in another sense, at least we get the vindication that it's not justice, right? It would be really heartbreaking to say what justice is just benefiting these people that are just trying to benefit themselves. Now, Thrasymachus isn't done yet. So in the next video, we'll see how Thrasymachus responds to Socrates' objection.